This is the new OneXFly from OneXPlayer, and I think this might be the closest alternative to the ROG Ally that one can get right now. It runs off AMD's Ryzen 7 7840U processor, which is pretty much an equivalent to the Z1 Extreme inside the top tier model of the Ally. I was recently sent a prototype to check it out, so in today's video, we'll be checking out the OneXFly and all of its features. Before we jump right into it, I'll let you guys know right away that you can find out more information about it or even pre-order one through their Indiegogo campaign, which they've got going on right now. I've linked it down below so you guys can go ahead and check it out. Alright, let's check out the OneXFly. So the prototype came packaged inside a made-to-fit carrying bag, and my first impression of it when I took it out was that it felt really light and compact to hold compared to most other handhelds I've used. I was sent the black prototype, but you can get it in a white color option as well. Either way, I think both colors look really clean on the device. There was also a 65 watt power adapter and a detachable USB-C charging cable sent with it. Alright, let's check out the hardware. First off, it's got an ergonomic feel to it and is not bulky at all to hold on to. It's definitely one of the lightest handhelds I've used to date, weighing about 580 grams. For reference, the ROG Ally weighs 28 grams more and the Steam Deck weighs 89 grams more, and both also have larger bodies. The OneXFly is also sporting a 7-inch 1080p IPS display with a maximum of 450 nits for brightness. Now, the screen also supports 120Hz, but the prototype unit I was sent only came with a maximum refresh rate of 60Hz, so unfortunately, I'll be limited to testing at that maximum in this video. I've been told that the final production units will come with the maximum 120Hz screen. Besides the refresh rate, the display is also surrounded by some really thin bezels, especially in comparison to a lot of other handhelds I've come across in my past. On the black edition, which I've got, the bezels being the same color also makes it blend in really nicely, making the device look almost bezel-less. For controls, the OneXFly uses an Xbox controller layout. There's the alternating joysticks that both use Hall sensor for a longer lifespan and better accuracy during gameplay. Now, keep in mind that they're also small size like what you'd find on a Nintendo Switch. Personally, I think it's very fitting for a device that small and compact. On the right side of the screen, there's ABXY buttons, an in-game menu button, and two buttons at the bottom. One of them is customizable while the other one has two functions. When you short press it, it brings up the OneXConsole software, and when you long press it, it brings up the new game library software. There's also RGB on the OneXFly, as you can see at the bottom corners and below the joysticks. You can customize the wording on the bottom left to anything you like when you're buying one, but unfortunately, it cannot be modified after. Due to some constraints on their end, I was sent one with a text that reads cream cake, which was certainly not my choice. On the other hand, the RGB lighting underneath the sticks can be changed from within the built-in software on the device, which I guess is a little bit of a positive. On the left side of the screen, there's a D-pad, which felt really nice to the touch. Then there was another in-game menu button at the top and a button at the bottom that pulls up the Xbox game bar when pressed and held for a bit. On the top of the console, you'll find the shoulder buttons as well as the triggers. You'll also find two customizable buttons, a power button, a volume rocker, an LED indicator light, 3.5mm audio jack, a 40GB USB-C 4.0 port, and a full-size USB 3.2 port. Personally, I'm a big fan of seeing that full-size USB 3.2 port, which can come in very handy for connecting devices that require that without the need for a dock. Underneath the device, there's an SD card slot and another 40GB USB 4.0 Type-C port, and both of these ports can handle charging and data transfer, which is great for use with external devices like, say, an eGPU for example. There's also two downward-facing Harman Audio EFX speakers positioned under the console as well.
Thanks for the help. But who are you people?
My name is Sir Junda, and this is my captain, Grease Ridus.
They're definitely some of the best sounding speakers that I've ever heard on a handheld. Now, when you flip the console around, you'll notice that there's an inlet vent at the back, which is part of the single fan cooling system that the OneXFly uses. The corresponding outlet vent is located topside if you didn't already notice. There's also a nice soft touch surface on the back there, which is really nice for holding onto the console for extended periods. It's also got some ergonomic grips which work really great, especially if you have small to average sized hands. Keep in mind that the OneXFly isn't a ready-to-use device right out of the box, so unless you're already used to gaming on Windows, you might struggle a little bit with setting it up and then gaming on it. As usual with any device running Windows 11 OS, the first thing you'd want to do is complete a bunch of updates for Windows and the graphics driver in order to ensure smooth operation. After getting through all that and making sure the AMD Adrenalin software is working correctly, the console is pretty much ready to use. At this point, you can also benefit from the freedom you get with Windows 11, which includes but isn't limited to access to a variety of game launchers and other things. In comparison to Linux, which the Steam Deck runs on, there's definitely more games available through Windows 11. For me, I play most of my PC games through Xbox Game Pass and the Steam Game Launcher, and since the OneXFly is basically a PC in handheld form, I can also access all of those games on it as well. The OneXFly uses an updated version of the OneXPlayer software they used on their previous devices. It's called OneXConsole, and this version has been updated and provides better control over gameplay performance, and also now comes with a new game library that collects all the games installed on the device and brings them into a unified interface for easy access. You can either scan the console automatically or manually for games and then import them into the system. The automatic scanning worked great for games I downloaded through my Steam library, but couldn't locate ones I downloaded through my Xbox Game Pass library. I tried the manual import system to solve this and it worked, but imported games without a thumbnail or cover photo. Now this can be fixed, but it will require a bit of manual work. The OneXConsole software also lets you control TDP, which is what determines the level of performance on the device. The lowest preset is 4 watts and it goes all the way up to 30 watts in stepwise manner, but that 30 watt can definitely be exceeded by using a third-party software. At the lowest wattage, expect the longest battery life, the weakest performance, and the lowest fan noise. 4 watts isn't going to be very useful for most games, but once you get around that middle mark at 15 watts, the OneXFly begins to handle gameplay much better. At this wattage, expect an average draw of power, so about average battery life and performance at this TDP. And it also comes with about average fan noise, which is still very minimal. At anything from 25 watts to 30 watts, you get the least amount of battery life, but you also get the best performance out of the OneXFly. I was surprised to notice that the fan still wasn't very loud, even at the maximum of 30 watts. The OneXConsole also provides access to fan control. You can set it to automatic where it increases and reduces the fan speed based on the temperature of the device, or you can use any of the other 2 presets or even set your own fan curves. From within the OneXConsole software, you can also turn on CPU turbo or turn it off, but keep in mind that turning it on will consume more power. You probably won't need it turned on for most games, so you could turn it off if you want to save some power. You can change resolutions as well, choose between 9 RGB lighting options, tweak brightness and volume levels, change vibration settings, and a few other things from within the OneXConsole software. Button customization will also be possible through the OneXConsole software in the final production units because it isn't at the moment. Keep in mind that the prototype which I've got for this video does not come with the final version of the OneXConsole software, and the whole system is expected to get better in the final production units. Now, before we jump into some gameplay tests, let's quickly take a look at some important performance specs of the console. As I mentioned earlier, the device runs off AMD's Ryzen 7 7840U processor with an AMD Radeon 780M iGPU for graphics. The unit I've got comes equipped with the base 16GB of DDR5 RAM, which should be enough for gaming only, but you can get it at higher configurations up to 64GB for some serious multitasking. It uses 2280 style M.2 SSD for storage, and this unit comes with 1TB, but the base model starts at 512GB all the way up to 2TB. It also comes with a 48 watt-hour battery and can be charged very fast using the supply 65 watt charger or even a 100 watt charger. For reference, the Ally and the Steam Deck both come equipped with 40 watt-hour batteries. For gameplay tests, I decided to see how the OneXFly will perform at different TDP levels and resolutions for a few games. The first game I tried was Star Wars. I started off at the maximum 30 watt TDP with resolution set to 1080p and graphics set to the minimum preset. The game looked great at the native resolution, even on the lowest graphics settings. I'm sure this is mainly due to the screen being 7 inches as opposed to when viewed on a TV or a large monitor. At 30 watts, I was getting around high 50 frames per second with some dips below 50 every now and then. In short, the game ran smoothly at this TDP throughout. I lowered the TDP to 15 watts next while still maintaining that 1080p resolution and the lowest graphics presets. This was to see how well the game performed while trying to save battery. The game still looked great visually, but now I was getting frame rates between 30 and 50. I played long enough to make sure I wasn't getting any dips below 30 because that's the point when I consider a game unplayable. There were occasional dips below 30, but I'm sure at a higher TDP between 15 and 30 watts, there won't be any. I then switched to a lower resolution of 720p while still keeping the TDP at 15 watts and graphics settings still at the lowest. And although there was a step down in resolution, the game still looked pretty good to me on that small 7-inch display. Now I was getting 50 plus FPS more consistently, which meant a much smoother gameplay experience at 15 watts and 720p resolution than at 1080p resolution. I decided to try playing at 10 watts TDP, which saves the console a lot of power, and it still held above 30 frames per second, but there were frequent dips below 30, and personally, I wouldn't play at 10 watts, but it's definitely doable. The next game I tested out was Cyberpunk, and again here, I started off at the maximum 30 watt TDP, 1080p resolution, and with the lowest graphics preset. The game looked great and ran around 45 plus frames per second throughout with a lot of high 50s, so very smooth. At 15 watts with the same resolution and graphics preset, I was getting mostly between 30 to 40 frames per second, but never dipping below that forbidden 30 frames per second, which honestly is great. I went ahead and switched to 720p with the same graphics preset to see how much more frames I could squeeze out of the console at that 15 watt TDP. Keep in mind that Cyberpunk also has AMD's FSR 2.1 built into it, and this is great for upscaling gameplay resolution without compromising frame rates. The game still looked pretty good at 720p with that upscaling, but now I was getting 50 plus frames per second, which led to an even smoother gameplay at that 15 watt TDP. Finally, I lowered the TDP to 10 watts, still keeping the resolution at 720p. At this point, I was getting frequent dips below 30 frames per second, in which case I suggest avoiding 10 watts when playing this game on the OneXFly. Next up, I moved on to Mafia Definitive Edition. Again, I started off at 30 watts TDP and 1080p resolution. I also kept the graphics settings at the lowest preset, and with those settings, I was able to get some pretty decent visuals. I got about 50 plus FPS throughout, which was pretty solid. At 15 watts with the same resolution and graphics preset, the FPS numbers dropped to 40 plus, which was still pretty solid at 1080p. At 720p, still with the TDP set to 15 watts, the game still looked nice on that 7-inch display, and FPS numbers increased to the high 50s. There's no built-in FSR for upscaling in this game like in Cyberpunk, but it's also not as demanding graphically. Lowering the TDP to 10 watts, still at 720p, the game was no longer able to stay above 30 frames per second consistently. I noticed this happened with pretty much every game I tried, so I don't think I'd recommend playing most games at anything lower than 15 watts. If you plan on emulating with this, then you might be able to play at lower TDPs than 15 watts. I decided to see how the OneXFly handles on online FPS, so I launched Apex Legends next. This loaded up quickly and ran like a charm from the first time I played at the game's default resolution of 1080p. At 30 watts, I was pretty much getting a consistent 60 frames per second throughout, and the gameplay was really smooth with no lags or stutters at all. At 15 watts, the game was still holding above 50 frames per second throughout, which means it's much less demanding than a lot of the other games that we've seen so far. I decided not to check at lower resolutions after this, since 15 watts is the acceptable TDP that I like to play at to maximize battery as well as performance. Also keep in mind that you'll need Wi-Fi to play online games like this one. The OneXFly comes equipped with Wi-Fi 6, so it does really good when used for remote play or cloud gaming. Keep in mind that this is also dependent on your Wi-Fi technology and the strength of the Wi-Fi used for streaming. The last game I tried out was FIFA 23 just to see how well a sports game runs. Since EA's anti-cheat doesn't allow the use of the OneXConsole software while playing, I made sure to set the TDP to 25 watts before even launching the game at all. At the native 1080p with graphics set to low or even auto, visuals looked great and the OneXFly was able to maintain around 60 frames per second, but whenever there was a cutscene, things got really choppy and frames usually dropped below 30. This isn't much of an issue since I'm sure most people don't care about cutscenes in sports games and will tend to skip it most of the time. Overall, my first impressions of the OneXFly since I've had it is that it's probably the closest alternative to the ROG Ally right now that's worth any consideration. Its portability is one of the biggest advantages I'll say it has over a lot of other handhelds in the market right now. There's also the fact that it comes equipped with a good amount of versatile I/O ports that can come in very handy. The 120Hz display, which is to be expected in the final production units, is something else that makes this thing stand out right now, as there's not much else out there with that one spec. The icing on the cake is that powerful 7840 chip that it runs off of, which makes it possible to now play top-tier AAA games on such a compact device. These kinds of devices are usually expected to be priced higher, but the sheer amount of competition in the handheld space right now is starting to bring these powerful devices into more affordable price ranges. If you want to find out more about it, don't forget to use the link that I've added down in the description below. Anyway, that's everything for this one. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you guys in my next one. If not, thanks for watching. It's Tommy, and I'm out, y'all.